Hello and welcome back to the channel. I am attira.kell and this is A Soldier's Opinion, the series where I apply my 19 years of military experience to the military professions of Star Citizen. I try to address how those professions were conducted in the past, how they are done today, and what we should expect to see from Star Citizen to best replicate those capabilities in the game. Now, I'm not sure you noticed, but it's been a while since our last ASO video. I thought it important to say that my unit is back at work full time, more or less. So with the increase of work comes less time and energy to make videos, so please bear with me. But if you like this content, please like and subscribe, as it lets me know you want me to continue these deep dives into the military professions of Star Citizen. And if you feel moved to, share this video, as this helps us spread the good word on ways we can implement real-world mechanics of military combat into the game. Now, I have been asked to do a video on piracy. However, piracy is not a military profession, so technically falls outside the scope of this series. However, there is within the military realm a legal analog to piracy, and so today we are going to tackle the complex subject of privateering. Now, I do not normally include politics or recent news in these videos. However, with regard to privateering, there's actually some interesting recent news. From several different locations, there have been calls for the US military to use privateers as a form of harassment or chastisement in response to Chinese efforts to expand their territorial reach in the South China Sea. With that said, I'm not going to go into the specifics of these territorial disputes within the South China Sea. I will simply say that just because it's called the South China Sea doesn't give China a pass to rule it with an iron fist. There are many countries that have coastlines on this body of water, and each one has a claim based on international law. But it is a fascinating development that there have been calls to introduce privateers to what is already a fairly tense environment, as a means of expanding the US Navy's and really the Western world's ability to check Chinese aggression. And that right there is my clever transition to what in fact privateering is. Privateer can refer to an individual person or a ship, and that person or ship engages in maritime warfare on behalf of a sovereign state's navy. This could literally be any sovereign state or an organization seeking to be a sovereign state. And we'll talk more a little bit on that in a minute. But because privateering specifically involves taking ships and cargo as prize, its best, most simple definition is that privateering is authorized legal piracy. The intent for that nation or state is more or less to expand their military influence on the high seas, or in our case, space, through the use of armed civilian ships and crew. But like I said, privateering is a complex subject, and so you cannot reasonably talk about it without discussing piracy. The term pirate is a fairly broad one that encompasses a myriad of foul deeds. Robbery, kidnapping, and murder all qualify you to be a pirate if you do them on a boat in the water, or in our case, space. For a nice rundown on how pirates operated in real life, I'll put a link down in the description for 2 videos by CPG Gray, as he does a fantastic job at laying out how individual crews operated in that oh so glorious age of piracy. But before we move on, we aren't quite done yet with our definition of terms. We also have the terms Corsair and Buccaneer. Often used interchangeably today, they actually refer to 2 different groups of pirates who operated in 2 very separate areas of operation. Corsair refers to pirates or privateers operating in the Mediterranean Sea. Specifically from the late 14th century clear through to the early 19th century, Corsairs operated on both sides of a long conflict between Christian states and the Ottoman Empire for maritime control of the Med. Because this effectively broke down over religious lines, the term Corsair carried at the time additional religious weight while they were active. Buccaneers, on the other hand, were very specific to the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific coastline of Central America. There is some interesting history here about French wild game hunters and where the etymology of the name comes from, but it isn't really critical. It is these pirates that give us much of the colorful stories about their trade and have provided the source material for movies and shows like Black Sails and Pirates of the Caribbean. Now, no one here is telling you what to call your organization or activity. These definitions have largely lost their meaning, and so if you want to be a Corsair, be a Corsair. There are no religious overtones to that word any longer. But now, at least at a minimum, we collectively know their origins. In fact, over time, Corsairs gained more of a swashbuckling reputation, and so the word Corsair is also used to create a more romantic or flamboyant impression when referring to privateers or pirates. Alright. With definitions out of the way, let's move on to the very specific factor that separated a pirate from a privateer. To legally be considered a privateer, the captain of a vessel must have a letter of marque, which states openly that the ship is operating under the direction of a state or sovereign. This roughly means that privateers were effectively considered a naval auxiliary. With this document in hand, the crew was authorized to take enemy property as the armed hand of their sovereign and to share in the profits. This is a pretty key distinction because privateering was a recognized and, more importantly, legal form of combat amongst the nations, whereas pirates were universally hated and hunted. When this was a common practice during the Age of Sail, the letter of marque, along with internationally recognized norms, allowed privateers who were captured to be treated as prisoners of war as long as their letter of marque was valid. It should be noted, though, that though privateering has largely fallen out of use, these protections are generally continued to this day, whereby privateers are generally thought to be covered under the Geneva Convention's 1977 Additional Protocol 1. Now, we've talked about the differences between a pirate and a privateer, and I think it is fairly clear that more or less the tactics, techniques, and procedures of the two are almost identical. Both seize property not their own on the high seas, sometimes violently and sometimes not, and both attempt to sell those goods for profit. But while pirates almost always took the cargo but left the ship, assuming you surrendered without a fight, a privateer was in it to win it. Most often they would take cargo and ship as their prize, sailing to the nearest friendly port. And this is where it gets truly complex. Enter prize law. Privateering was a fairly heavily regulated activity, and one would presume that today, or 900 years from today, it still would be. The core of how a privateer would get paid is thus: return with the ship and crew to a port friendly to the country you are working for. Submit all property seized to a representative of the prize court in that country, along with all evidence at hand that led you to take that ship as prize. Once this was complete, all perishable cargo would be sold and the proceeds held in escrow by the court to be paid to whichever side won the dispute. The captured crew of the prize ship would be quartered on land away from the ship and be retained as witnesses for the court. Once this was complete, a prize court would be convened. Now, during the hearing, the prize captor or privateer was only required to show reasonable suspicion to the court. As long as this was achieved, then the prize was considered legal. This placed the burden of proof of innocence on the captured ship's owner and effectively established a guilty until proven innocent standard in prize law. If the prize court ruled in favor of the privateer, then the prize ship and cargo were condemned, and the title handed over legally to the privateers. In these cases, the privateers would most often dispose of the ship and cargo however they chose. They could sell both at auction or through private sale, or as in some cases, retain the ship and increase the size of their privateering enterprise. It should be noted here, of course, that the sovereign got their cut of the profits too, but losing 20% of total profit on the sale of a ship and cargo was still a significant payday for the privateer, which is of course why they did it. If the court ruled in favor of the captured captain and crew, then the ship and cargo was returned to them and they were allowed to go on their way. Now, there were certainly some things that could swing the verdict against the privateer. If they themselves fired while under false flag, it may cost them dearly, meaning that on approach they might fly one flag to sow confusion, but must raise the flag of their employer nation before they fire or attempt to seize the vessel. Embezzlements of the cargo seized, acts personally violent or unnecessarily injurious upon the captured crew would certainly work against the privateer. So too would improperly separating the crew from the prize vessel or not producing them for examination before the prize court may also render the arrest of the vessel or cargo as prize illegitimate, resulting in the ship being returned to its owner and crew along with various fines against the privateer. Now that we have gently caressed the wave tops of prize law, let me be clear up front, I don't think we should have a full-on prize court system within Star Citizen. Remember, we are just addressing how it was done in the past, but I do have some thoughts on how we can implement prize law so that it is profitable for a privateering game, but more on that later. With all that said, there were of course other options a privateer could take. It is important to note that because a privateer's principal goal is to disrupt the trade of the enemy of their patron sovereign, they are perfectly within their rights to burn a ship to the waterline if events conspire to prevent them from either offloading cargo or taking the ship outright. This might be because of bad weather, shortage of prize crew to crew the vessel, dwindling water and provisions, or the proximity of an overpowering enemy force. But remember, the secondary objective, well, the primary objective for the privateer, but the secondary for the sovereign who hired them, was to make profit. So, in these cases, it was common that a vessel taken as prize might be ransomed. That is, instead of destroying her on the spot, the privateer or naval officer would accept a script in the form of an IOU for an agreed sum as ransom from the ship's master. This is of course amusing because on land, this would be extortion and the promise to pay completely unenforceable in court. But at sea, it was accepted practice and the IOUs negotiable legal documents. Another very real option was to avoid the prize court system altogether and opt for a gray market or a black market solution. This was fairly common in the post-Spanish succession period as privateer smugglers such as Jean and Pierre Lafitte maintained their own small ports of operation where cargo could be offloaded and sold inland for profit, therefore bypassing the sovereign state's cut and maximizing profits for the privateer. This, of course, begins to take us into the gray areas where privateering and piracy begin to blend into one. It should be noted, of course, that if a privateer's letter of marque were to expire while they are in possession of a prize, they might be branded as a pirate. And if they take a prize after the letter's expiration, then they are definitely engaging in piracy. And now finally, let's quickly talk about why privateering, or in other words, state-sponsored piracy, was tolerated. To do this, I'm going to quote The Prize Game by Donald Petrie. Self-interest was the driving force that compelled men of the sea to accept the international law of prize, including merchants, because it brought a valuable element of certainty to their dealings. If the rules were clear and universal, they could ship their goods abroad in wartime after first buying insurance against known risks. On the other side of the table, those purchasing vessels and cargoes from prize courts had the comfort of knowing that what they bought was really theirs. The doctrine and practice of maritime prize was widely adhered to for 4 centuries among a multitude of sovereign nations, because adhering to it was in the material interest of their navies, their privateersmen, their merchants and bankers, and their sovereigns. Diplomats and international lawyers who struggle in this world to achieve a universal rule of law may well ponder on this lesson. Now, we have spent a fair amount of time on what might be called the institution of privateering, how it worked. Now let's look at some examples of privateering successes. Perhaps the most famous of all privateers in the West was Sir Francis Drake. Most famous for being the first to captain a ship which circumnavigated the globe, he also was a very accomplished privateer. He was also a British naval officer and politician, but we are going to focus on a couple of examples of his successes as a privateer. In 1572, he sailed from England to the Spanish Main. Specifically, he was directing his efforts towards Panama, which was the point where the Spanish would move seized Peruvian gold across to the Caribbean, where it would be loaded onto Spanish treasure galleons. In this, Drake's first major win, he ambushed a mule train on land, laden with 20 tons of Spanish gold and silver. Unable to carry it all, Drake's crew buried most of it and carried out what they could. After evading Spanish pursuers, Drake made it back to his ship and was able to recover at least part of the gold and silver. Though all of this was technically legal, as England was at war with Spain and Drake was operating under an English letter of marque, the Spanish still labeled him a pirate. 6 years later, Drake would take his greatest prize, the Spanish treasure galleon Nuestra Señora de la Concepción. Drake learned of the Nuestra Señora while taking another ship. That ship was laden with around 37,000 ducats, which today would very roughly be around 7 million pounds or $8,761,000. When Drake learned of the Nuestra Señora, he immediately gave chase. You see, Drake had snuck into the Pacific Ocean undetected by the Spanish, and since it was incredibly unusual for the English to be in the Pacific, both of these galleons were taken completely by surprise. Initially, the Spanish captain refused to surrender, but the first volley of cannon by Drake's Golden Hind quickly convinced him to surrender. After 6 days of offloading the galleon's treasure onto his own ship, Drake released the ship and crew, offering them gifts according to their rank and status. What was the prize, you ask? Half a ton of gold, porcelain jewelry, coins, and jewels, and around 26 long tons of silver. The best estimate I could find assesses that as of 2017, that haul would be worth around 480 million pounds, or somewhere just north of $600 million. Our next, if less successful, example of a privateer is that of John Paul Jones, though in general he was considered successful. Quite a strange character, Jones held commissions in the British, US, and Russian navies at different points in his life. Jones represents an example of a naval officer acting as a privateer while in service to the state. It also is an interesting example of using naval privateering as an asymmetric strategy for victory when a state cannot effectively challenge the enemy in a pitched battle. Jones's first significant prize taken was a brigantine full of military supplies. Saved from the HMS Cerberus, which was giving chase, Jones brought this brigantine to the US East Coast where Congress purchased the vessel and pressed it into service as the USS Hampton. After submitting this prize, he sailed his ship, the USS Providence, to Nova Scotia for a 6-week voyage, where he took a total of 16 prizes. Perhaps Jones's most notable victory, and one that was used in the Americas for propaganda, was the taking of the HMS Drake in 1778. Now captaining the USS Ranger, Jones engaged in an hour-long gun battle with the Drake until finally closing with the ship to engage in a boarding action. This victory was the first and perhaps most successful defeat of a Royal Naval vessel in their own waters. However, while Jones had a reputation as an effective ship's captain, though he was thought of as a pirate in Britain, his great undoing was political. Multiple feuds in Boston resulted in him being more or less sidelined, and so he made his way to France and then to Russia. In Russia, he was fairly successful, but again, politics, this time in the Russian court, would be his undoing. He would ultimately retire to France with a Russian pension as a rear admiral. Now, we have said that privateering and piracy are often indistinguishable, so let me provide a single example of a pirate. In this case, what is believed to be the most powerful pirate in history. You may be thinking, surely he'll discuss William Kidd, Henry Morgan, Bartholomew Roberts, or Blackbeard. But no, these men do not hold a candle to the most powerful pirate in history, Xiao of China. This female pirate got her start with her husband, and her name apparently translates to Chang's wife. But when her husband died, she quickly moved to consolidate her own power. Shi, meaning widow of Qing, built an empire that could literally rival the navies of nation-states of the day. The reported numbers vary significantly, but a kind of middle ground is that at her height, Shi controlled 1,500 ships and around 80,000 sailors. And to top it all off, when she decided that she wanted to retire, she negotiated with the Chinese imperial government to not only allow her complete amnesty, but also any of her pirates who retired that year. And they got to keep everything they stole in that year. Pretty freaking epic. Now, given all that we've said above, let's talk about profit. Just like piracy, privateers would always take shares of the prize. I've put a couple of links in the description to where I've pulled my information, but the easiest breakdown I found was in a draft academic paper by Daniel Benjamin and Dendy Macaulay. As a quick side note, this paper breaks out the math, so if you're interested in trying to replicate historic pay methodologies for your pirate or privateer-based organization, this is the place to start. This paper breaks down what I consider to be fairly complex math to determine privateers' pay. Share size was determined by overall crew size. Privateers were often also paid a monthly salary as well, which factored into how much their prize share might be on an individual level. The example they used for share distribution was the Resolution, which had a crew of 34. So based on this scale for the Resolution, the owners of the Resolution received 24.25 shares, with the remaining 75.75 shares divided and payable to the crew. Now let's use the example of Sir Francis Drake in the Nuestra Señora de la Concepción, and for this, let's use modern currency figures. The Hind had a crew complement of around 80 sailors in total. Now, the math is really super complex, but let's do some very rough estimates. We know that Queen Elizabeth took just over 50% of the prize, but let's just call it 50%. By the way, apparently this was enough money to pay off all of England's national debt for the year with money left over. But that means that with what remained, a single share from this haul was close to £3 million, or $3,754,000, and that just for the able seaman. Drake, if he took the same 16 shares as the Resolution's captain did, made somewhere in the neighborhood of £48 million in modern currency. This is, of course, without accounting for other contractual obligations such as injury payment, death gratuities for families, spotting bonuses where you get an extra small cut for spotting a prize, adjustments to prize pay due to salary, and a host of other things. But you can see how both captain and crew instantly with one prize made their fortunes. Now, the capture of the Nuestra Senora was certainly an outlier and fairly unique, but you can certainly see how a privateering crew taking multiple prizes over the course of a 6-month guerre de course might make far more money than a crew running cargo or working for the Navy. Though of course it wasn't completely unheard of for the Navy to also take a prize, such as in our examples of John Paul Jones. So it certainly behooved everyone to attempt to take a ship rather than to sink her. Now, most privateering came to an end in the mid-19th century when the majority of European nations signed the Paris Declaration respecting maritime law of 1856. However, the United States never signed this document, so under the U.S. Constitution Article 1, Section 8, it is still theoretically possible for Congress to authorize letters of marque. But in the last 150 years, it has not done so. Alright. Now, we have spent a reasonable amount of time discussing the legal, judicial, logistical, and moral requirements for privateering in the real world. So let's dive in and talk about privateering in Star Citizen. So right off the bat, I think it's fair to say that the modern practice of, or lack thereof, of privateering should not impact Star Citizen. In reality, I think this would be a great profession that would allow all players to engage in the mechanics of piracy, whether they be pirates or law-abiding citizens. The question we have to ask is how to make it work within our game. We have the Militia Mobilization Initiative, or the Civilian Defense Force, to allow civilians to serve in a defense capacity, but that doesn't directly translate to privateering. You can have military defense without the ship-taking for-profit aspect of it, though one might certainly argue that privateering could be a subset of militia work, though I might argue in return, in my research there is no discussion of privateers being militia per se. Now, we have talked about how privateering is typically a state-sponsored event, though within Star Citizen all of the major civilized powers, the UEE, the Xiang, the Banu, are at peace. The Vanduul certainly provide an interesting target, but we know that they prefer to self-destruct rather than to be captured. So that presents a interesting and exciting challenge. Maybe CIG can develop a torpedo that instead of detonating, pierces the hull and releases deadly toxins, killing the crew. This would then allow you to at least maybe have a chance at taking a Vanduul ship intact. In the realm of state-sponsored privateering, the natural place we might find it is of course with the Xiang against the Kurthak. 800 years of war and no end in sight, this would of course be the perfect playground for the privateer. However, I imagine that there would be a fairly steep reputation requirement with the Xiang to gain access to the Kurthak in any form. But if they start to lose, maybe a year or two after game launch, whenever that comes, well, maybe we'll get a chance. And of course, all of this would be against NPCs. So, if there are limitations in the lore with regard to traditional privateering, who might we privateer against? Well, it seems to me that within the Militia Mobilization Initiative, the most obvious answer is criminal and pirate organizations, both NPC and player. We know that reputation will be a key aspect of the game, both personal and organizational, though we don't know yet to what extent. We do know that missions will unlock specific to your reputation with a specific NPC organization, as well as the type of ships you can bring to the fight. In other words, you may have an exceptional reputation with Hurston Dynamics, but they should not be asking you to attack an Idris bounty with an Aurora. So, working within the reputational system, privateering, or the ability to capture cargo and ships of criminal organizations, might be a mid-level reputational mission unlock for law-abiding players. Now, you might ask, why only law-abiding? And the answer is, as we have discussed, anyone with a ship can pirate if they don't care about the law. Remember, privateering is legalized piracy. That means that any officially recognized system or planetary government might issue a local letter of marque against criminal or pirate organizations in the system, and any player with enough reputation and an issued letter of marque can begin privateering. As a side note, this would also give pirate organizations and your local PvPers some additional gameplay loops that they might not otherwise have. Instead of pirates pirating and lawful players trying to kill them, those lawful players can now privateer the pirates. Now, that brings up the question, how do we know who we can and cannot privateer against? Well, therein lies the challenge. Right now we have no way to investigate or hunt down ne'er-do-wells in the game until they are shooting at us, or they have a high enough crime stat. And ships don't fly flags, or false flags, because space. So let's talk it through. In a given system, we can assume various pirates and criminals will set up shop. Those organizations and the player members of those organizations will build negative or positive reputation based on their actions and hopefully their associations. Within this construct, even the best, most lawful member of a pirate organization might be taken as a prize legally because their efforts and lawful profits are supporting the illegal activities of their organization. But for this to work, CIG needs to provide some tools for the players to use to find their targets. Perhaps the easiest method is for the back-end servers to track a player's organization and reputation and generate privateering missions against legal or semi-legal players in criminal organizations. But this seems kind of boring, and seems very tier 0. If CIG wants to spice things up, then we need to be forced into finding our own targets. Enter improved scanners. CIG might give us the option of installing improved scanning suites onto our ships that when cross-checked against local comm links, might tell us if a ship is linked to a criminal organization. There could be an option for privateers to download, if they have the databanks for it, the local database for individuals suspected of working for criminal organizations, allowing the privateer to leave the comfort of the comlink radius and follow the cargo haulers into deep space. Handheld devices might allow privateers to mark a target while they are on the ground, in a station or planetside trading post. Following this line of thought, there might be a tool to physically mark a target individual or their ship to allow the privateer to follow them at a distance. A fun example of this can be found in the book Star Wars 000. In this novel, clone commandos fired a tracking round from sniper rifles. These rounds would spread tracking nanites on their targets, thus allowing them to track the targets through the city without having to physically follow them. Another key tool for privateering might also be a space version of a flag. It might be that this is a transponder signal that can be adjusted, legally for a privateer or illegally for a pirate. One transponder might say you're a member of a.m.m.o, while your privateering flag broadcasts you're operating with the authority of Hurston Dynamics, all controlled through your MFDs. So how might all of this play out in the game? Let's look at a quick scenario that might serve as a simple example. Let's say that Pirate Organization A has set up along a couple of profitable trade routes. Let us assume that they have a logistical node somewhere between the two routes to facilitate operations at both. Now, you don't want to send your most notorious members on trade missions to resupply your logistical node. You instead might like to send your more law-abiding, less reputationally challenged member of your organization to make supply runs. Now enter the privateer. They know that pirates are in the system and there is profit to be made. They most likely won't want to attack your pirate base head-on, so instead may choose an alternate approach, finding instead a soft target, your law-abiding pirate cargo runner. Assuming CIG implements a methodology for us to gather intel on other players in the game, the privateer might then determine that cargo runner B is a member of Pirate Organization A. As a member of a pirate organization, he is now fair game for the privateer, and so he can take actions to attempt to either capture or destroy that ship. But the privateer must be careful. He can't engage the target too close to the pirate operations, as he runs the risk of reinforcements arriving to protect the cargo. This might be fine for a large organization with a big fleet on hand, but for a smaller ship, the privateer will want to take the prize as close to safety as possible, so it becomes a race that really depends on timing and location. If the privateer successfully interdicts the prize ship and disables it, both captains enter a second phase of the race, this one against criminal or pirate reinforcements. But there is a decision for the pirates, and this decision we cannot be certain of until we know how dynamic the game's military and policing NPCs will be. If the criminal or pirates come into a comlinked area, will they automatically initiate a series of bounty or militia mercenary missions, informing the entire system of their location? Is that single cargo runner worth it, or are they on their own to protect the larger piracy operation? How desperate do they need supplies of food, water, fuel, and ammunition? If they're on the ragged edge, it might be worth it to protect your supplies. If not, they might let their cargo pilot be taken as prize. I think the key to these decisions lies in how secure the system is. If pirates can just fly to the nearest station and refuel, rearm, resupply, then there is very little pressure on them logistically. Even having a single point like Grimhex might significantly reduce the overall logistical pressure and operating costs of the organization. Some systems should certainly be this way. For the privateer then, they will face a much tougher threat that is unburdened by logistical challenges. But equally so, there should be systems that have no real safe haven capable of supporting pirates or criminals in significant numbers. This gives ships like the Kraken or Idris a real role within the pirate fleet. You need these ships to act as a mobile base of operations, providing all the required logistical services your fleet needs to fight and pirate. But if you plan on staying in the system for a long time, then you may need to resupply, and this is where the privateer can place asymmetric pressure on the pirate or criminal organization. By preventing resupply, the effective privateer forces the pirate organization to make a choice. Do they fight to maintain their position in a profitable system? Do they expose themselves and their fleet in an effort to protect resupply? Could this be an ambush? Do they withdraw to a system where they could conduct resupply safely? I think the objective of privateering for CIG should be to open up as many decisions for the players to make as possible on both sides. Sure, we should be able to take NPC ships as well, but this mechanic and profession lends itself to PvP, and both privateers and pirates should have complex decisions set before them that extend beyond to fight or not to fight, to kill or to run. Alright, with all that covered, let's move on to how CIG might implement prize law. If you're still with me at this point, you'll likely think it's a good idea that organizations friendly to the UEE, Banu, and Xiang are allowed to privateer legally against organizations designated as either criminal or pirate organizations. So we can move to the next step. We need a mechanism to allow the game to recognize, or to use another word, investigate the validity of a privateer's prize. Now, I don't think that this has to be very complicated to create a really enjoyable process. So to that end, let me lay it down step by step. We all know that on approach to a landing site, you have to request docking permission. As an extension of that, if a character is carrying a letter of marque, another option might be made available. For Tier 0 implementation, maybe just Port Alisar, Privateer. That request changes the interaction you have to go through from that point forward. When granted a pad and the ship is landed, the cargo can be shifted to the new cargo deck, where it is inventoried and secured, and the ship should be stored. If CIG introduces perishable goods at any point, those goods should be sold at the market value and the cash balance placed in escrow. At this point, neither the privateer nor the original owner of the ship have access to the ship or cargo. From this point, the privateer can go to a privateering terminal, or the legal terminal outside of the admin rooms, where the ship he just docked and all of its cargo are listed, and he submits it to the prize court for adjudication. Once this is complete, the original ship owner can then use the same terminal to file a dispute, or CIG could just assume that the original owner will 100% file a dispute. Once this process is complete, then the servers investigate the original owner. This comes down to a complex look at the owner's personal reputation and their organization's reputation. If CIG decides to track all players in NPC movement, then the investigation might extend to recent flight paths, as if the investigation is reviewing the ship's logs. Once all of this investigation is complete, the court makes a determination, with the winner receiving all the goods. If the privateer wins, he receives all the cargo and the net proceeds from the sale of the ship. Remember, no ship replication. If the original owner wins, he can move the cargo back onto the ship, spawn it, and depart. To amp up the accuracy of the privateer's proof, he might provide long-range scans, or maybe there is evidence that they can remove and submit once they are in control. And remember, in privateering, you only have to validate the privateer's suspicion. The original ship owner is guilty until he proves himself innocent. All in all, this process might take around 30 minutes in real time, representing a time sink of the court and law enforcement investigating the case. Now, I can hear you asking, how does the smuggler or pirate protect himself? Well, my answer to you is blades, blades, and more blades. Just like when you are deleting your criminal record at SPK, we as players should be able to wipe our ship's logs, or mask or replace or fake them. This may not come in the form of a blade, but it might. Really, I'm just talking about consumables. The higher the quality of the consumable, the higher the cost, but the higher chance that the investigation turns up nothing on your ship's logs. If you have no protections and you are a pirate or in a criminal organization, then you might always have a very high risk of losing your cargo and ship if you were taken as a prize. But that is only half of the equation. The individual character has reputation as well, and in this, certainly local reputation will be a key factor. It isn't known yet how quickly reputations will spread from system to system. I would like to imagine that an organization as well organized and infamous as the Matadors might have a multi-system reputation, and their individual members might be well known in those systems. But on the far side of the galaxy, they should be more or less not well known. Today, to get rid of our crime stat, we simply go to a terminal and wipe it. But this is really a Phase 0 implementation. We have no idea how hard this will be to accomplish in its final implementation. Hell, today, law enforcement backs up various databases to ensure that if data gets corrupted, they don't lose everything. So there should be another way outside of trying to hack the cops to cover our tracks. My initial thoughts go to fake documents, but that is very 21st century. Required, but dull. A more futuristic solution might be to have some form of bioshaping to remove or change fingerprints or other identifying features. Short of a DNA test, which the UEE might only get if you go to prison, it would be hard to nail down who you are. Unless, of course, we also get some type of DNA masking technology to further obfuscate the player from the law. This could give Endeavor captains an interesting illegal use of their science-focused ships. Now, as we wrap up, I do want to re-emphasize that CIG doesn't want us to replicate ships using piracy, and I presume this would extend to privateering. Though often ships were captured and pressed into service by their new owners, I think with a little thought we can all imagine an exploit to replicate ships in-game, making it very easy for a new player with the right friends to have a saber or a hammerhead in no time at all. So, since we cannot add captured ships to our fleets, our only option is to sell them. But there should be a significant difference between what privateers can earn and what pirates can earn. I think we can safely argue that 900 years in the future there will be very sophisticated ways to identify stolen ships, and that this makes it very hard to resell them illegally. That means that likely pirates will be relegated to selling stolen ships at junkyards and chop shops across the galaxy, though I am sure there will be some illegal ship dealers out there that can take ships off your hands in low security systems as well. But overall, there will likely be fewer of these dens of iniquity than the locations a lawful privateer has at his or her disposal. It is here that we have to remember that reselling the cargo as legitimate trade goods is where the big money comes in for pirates. Instead of getting a small salary as a crewman simply transporting goods and the owner taking the profit, you as the crew take a share of the total value of the cargo and ship. To further belabor the point, while the illegitimacy of stolen cargo should be easy to obfuscate for a pirate or middleman, and thus sold for close to market value, a ship should be far less so. Thus, with a limited resale value, we should see a decreased profit from the selling of ships for said pirates. Now, for privateering as a legal activity, you should be able to sell a ship at near market value, as long as you hold a valid letter of marque and abide by prize law. And so, if pirates might only get 25 to 35% of a captured ship's worth, a privateer should get a much higher prize value for their efforts, provided the prize is taken legally. And of course, both might get full market value for the cargo, as it has been either legally acquired or appropriately laundered, I'm not sure, and thus easily sold. Well, we're at the end. I didn't realize this video would take so much time or require so much work, but here we are and we made it. So to sum up, privateering is legal piracy. CIG should use privateering to open up piracy mechanics to all players, so it's not always about killing pirates. Prize law is complex, but it should be manageable. Prize court requirements might force some really interesting mechanics to protect pirates and criminals, driving new uses for science ships. And no replication of ships. Sorry guys. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into how CIG might incorporate privateering as a military profession into Star Citizen. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more of these deep dives. If you're looking for an organization to play some Star Citizen with, along with some other games as well, come check out a.m.m.o. Links as always are in the description down below. Later!